What's up, guys? Corey here with reptiles, toothless reptiles. I wanted to do a reading of the care sheet. So all of you guys can just listen to it and you don't even have to read the damn thing. You can throw it on if you have like YouTube Red. You can pay for YouTube Red and you can watch the video and just listen to the audio and let it play in the background while you're at work or whatever and listen to it just like you would a podcast. And hopefully that'll work out for everybody. So that way you guys don't have to read the care sheets. You'll have the option of listening to the care sheets. So, thing. I'm not going to wear that. I can hardly see out of it. I'm not going to be able to read. Okay, it's hot and stuffy in there. All right, so we're just going to read the care sheets because I want everybody to be able to get all the information from the care sheet. I understand not a lot of people want to sit down and read the entire care sheet, but if you have YouTube Red or something like that, you can take the YouTube video, download it, or just play it on your phone. That allows you to lock the screen and just listen to it on headphones, the same way you would do a podcast. And then we can, you guys can just listen to me read the entire care sheet, and I'll kind of go over little things as I go. I also have some of the supplies back here, so I'll go over that so I can show you that as we go. So if you are watching it, you can see that stuff as well. But we're basically go to www.toothlessreptiles.com and click the info tab and then just start reading. That is the care sheet. The first thing it says, obviously, is water monitor, Varanus, Salvator, basic hatchling care. So this entire care sheet was made specifically just to cover how we take care of our hatchlings. And this is just so you know how we're taking care of them, so you can set up your enclosures the exact same way or very similar, and it helps them transition into the new environment at your place much easier without them going into shock or without having a ridiculous acclimation period. There should be really minimal acclimation going on. So and first and foremost, there's somewhat of a disclaimer here, which is just please watch the 3 videos at the end of the sheet for reference before asking questions. Also, please call me directly with complicated issues, as email is a difficult way to convey complex solutions. These animals are an advanced species and should not be anyone's first reptile. Below is simply what has worked for me in the long term. There are many ways to care for a water monitor in a healthy environment. These suggestions are meant to be a baseline for figuring out what works for you and your specific reptile. And obviously my cell phone number is on there, 619-549-1508. As with all of my customers and people who aren't even my customers, I always give them my cell phone number. They're welcome to call me and talk to me about whatever. I've gone over care issues with other people's reptiles, as well as my own. So, every environment is different. So you figure even if you, like, let's say the room temperature that I keep my monitors in, since I'm in San Diego, never really gets lower than 70 degrees because the outside temperatures are rather warm and the house is well insulated, whatever. Well, 150 watt ceramic bulb works really well for that because the heat differential is such that the 150 watts can keep up with that heat change. So you're bleeding heat out of your cage into a 70-degree room, which is not a huge heat differential to where the amount of heat energy that 150 watt, it can actually give supplemental heat into the enclosure without just baseline trying to keep your animal alive. It's going to make that cage hot. If you're, say, in an area, or let's say you're in a basement somewhere, that's so funny. There's a cricket on the curtain. See, you can tell we keep the hatchlings in this room. But if you're keeping your cage in your cage in a room, like let's say you have it in a basement and you live in Chicago or something, and the basement in the winter gets down into the 40s, you have to upgrade your heat bulbs. You're probably going to end up with, even with a small vision enclosure that's 3 feet wide and 18 inches tall, you're going to end up with a 200 watt ceramic bulb in there, just because the temperature differential between the room temperature and the cage, you're going to be bleeding heat out into that room. And so the bulb has to produce enough heat to where it can heat up that area and still be able to heat enough to where you're not pulling all the heat out. Heat is energy, and it only moves in one direction. So if you have a cold room, it is basically sucking the heat from your enclosure. So you need to keep that in mind because the cold energy that's in the room is much larger than the heat energy that your dinky little 100-watt or 250-watt ceramic bulb is putting out. Just the wattage energy is just much less. The energy levels are, it's just, you can't compare. So, especially if you're doing a shutdown at night, that room is going to take over the temps and then you're back to starting at square one, which is why we never shut the heat lights off. So keep that in mind. Everybody's situation is different. So really you want to stick to the temps that I require and the substrates and little things that I require, and then you can figure it out. That's why I always recommend you run your cage in the area that you're putting your cage in for 24 hours at least before you start shooting with temp guns and making changes, because you need to let that cage settle in and run through an entire day cycle. So let's move on to the materials list. You're going to want a 4-foot long, 2-foot deep, and 2-foot high minimum enclosure. You will need large vents to keep the ambient down, a minimum of 2 16-inch by 8-inch vents. These vents you're going to want to put on the cold side of the enclosure because usually you're going to want an ample heat source on the hot side. So that way, whatever temperature variations there are in the room, you're not going to be screwing yourself. You're not going to get to a point where your bulbs can't keep up, but it will allow the cold side to be able to bleed off as much as it needs to keep that side of the enclosure cool. So as long as you have a hot side over here, a cold side over here that can vent, your monitor can simply move in that range and figure out what it wants. So you're essentially just creating a bar or a line graph, and then your monitor picks where it wants to be in that graph. Your monitor knows way better than you do how it wants to be taken care of. So your job as a keeper is to simply give it everything it could possibly need and give it that range to where it can figure out what it wants. If you're taking heat away at night or you're doing stuff like that, you're leaving your animal stuck in a box where it literally can't do anything about itself. So you're putting it in an area where it can't choose whether it wants to be hot or wants to be cold now. You're shutting its system down to where it has to be cold now, which is why a lot of animals end up getting sepsis and going septic in captivity because they're doing cold cool downs at night. And in the wild, obviously there is a cool down at night, but in the wild, a water monitor or any reptile would be able to find somewhere where it is warm to put out their night to keep digestion at least moving so it's not stuck at a halt. You figure if you have a boulder the size of a house, that's been baking in the sun in Indonesia every day, it has a ton of heat energy that's just saturated in that huge rock. So even at nighttime, if temperatures drop, they may all go to these rocks and sit on them and absorb the heat that's in those rocks. Those rocks and the earth is a huge insulator. So they are going to hold heat. They will always be able to find a warm spot. Now, granted, these areas are not going to be anywhere near the temps that they are during the day because you're basking in the sun. So they're going to be up in the 120, 130, 140, whatever's degrees, but they will be able to find enough warmth to keep their bodies digesting because they are scavengers. And a lot of times, water monitors especially are known for scavenging in the morning, and they're very active in the morning, and then they don't usually eat at night. But if the opportunity presents themselves, they will, and they will find heat sources. In captivity, you are most likely feeding them after work or whatever at night, and then you're immediately taking away their heat source. This is really bad. This is why a lot of water monitors don't grow very large in captivity, and another reason why a lot of water monitors get stunted growth and obviously can go septic and have a number of other issues just because you're shutting off their digestive tract as soon as you're feeding them. And it's just a horrible thing to do that a lot of people don't realize that they're doing. It takes a lot longer than, you feed them at 6, they start digesting by 7 p.m. and you're shutting off their heat lights at 8. So now you have what, 10 hours if you're running a 14-hour light cycle, so 10 hours that thing's sitting in there just being septic, and then it's trying to play catch up the next day when you turn the lights on. And a lot of times the next day is not long enough for them to completely digest that meal, so they end up having to restart the cycle at the end of the night when the heat lights shut off again. So keep that in mind when you set up your enclosures. Um, the the ZooMed, I specifically use ZooMed Forest Floor. The 15 quart size Tupperware containers, those work really well. If you have hatchlings and they're real small and you're worried about them being able to get out, put a rock in the water, make sure they can't get underneath it, and make sure it's not shoved against the side where they can get pinched underneath it, but they can get up on top of it to be able to get out, because if you're gone all day and they splash a ton of water out, they can get kind of stuck in the Tupperware. I've never seen it happen, but it's just something that I'm weary about. Make sure that you have 2 ceramic light fixtures with reflective domes. So that would be something like this. So you're going to want a ceramic light fixture, which is just the actual fixture is ceramic. And then these are the domes. So if you go to Home Depot, in the lighting area, like by the extension cords, they have these pre-built lights. One of them is like a ceramic dome that looks really similar to a lot of the reptile lights that you'll see. Another one is a plastic one, and it has these domes on it. So I buy the whole thing and I just unscrew this and basically throw out the rest of it because it's useless. You can't use that plastic dome. And crickets. I'm not that boring. So you use this dome, and you can basically what you do is you put your 150 watt ceramic bulb in there, push it through, and then now you can just screw that bulb in to the ceramic fixture, and this dome just sits there, and this will force all of that ceramic heat down into your stone. You need to have a stone for the basking area. Use, a 1-inch thick piece of slate. A 2-inch thick piece of slate is better. It holds more energy. Do not use floor tiles. And then also, you're going to want an Exoterra. Is this Exoterra? Yeah, Exoterra Reptile UVB 100. These are actually 26 watt. There's the spiral incandescent bulb, so these do not give off heat. If you have a croc monitor, do not use these because they won't bask under the ceramics because it doesn't give off light because they're arboreal. So they're used to basking under light. But for the water monitors, I don't want to get off topic. For the water monitors, use this because you don't want a light source that gives off heat, because you're already going to have a heat source in the ceramic that's going to be on 24 hours a day. So you just want something like this so you can put it on the cold side above the water dish, and then you're set. So this is all you need for your enclosure. You're going to have the hot side, 150 watt ceramic with the dome on it, forces the heat down. It'll lower your ambient temps and kick up your basking spot temps because it's forcing the heat down into a stone. And then your incandescent light bulb, which will not put off a ton of heat and be good for obviously UV, UVB. There's a big, I don't know, people say they don't need UV. I don't know, they don't need love and affection either. But what do you risk in giving them at least something similar to what they have in the wild? I mean, do they get UV when they live in Indonesia? Of course they do. So give it to them. Why wouldn't you? What do you risk? It's ridiculous. Anyway, I only use the Exoterra Reptile Multivitamin powder. The other Exo or the other brands I've had issues with ruining the appetites of the monitors. I don't know if they just use crappy fillers or what it is. But you're going to want an infrared temperature gun as well so you can shoot spots. Don't use probes like the temperature probes. You can put them in there just so you have them, but use a temp gun. And your water dish is going to be your biggest indicator of your low side ambient. So if you have a water dish in there and you have it in there for 24 hours, shoot the water. Whatever temperature the water is, that's probably the lowest temp your ambient is ever going to be, because the water is going to hold temp a lot more efficiently than a lot of the other stuff. I mean, there's not a whole lot of stuff you can shoot inside the enclosure with the temp gun to get temps from. And then you're going to want a large basking stone, like we already talked about. You're going to want a spray bottle so you can spray down the enclosure if you have to. And one thing with the hatchlings is you want to keep a decent high humidity and a good temperature, you know, as far as ambient, because you have to figure their entire life so far, they have been in an incubator at an exact temp at 100% humidity. So if you take them out of an incubator and you put them into a cage that does not have high humidity and is at a shitty temp or has a drop temp at night, they're going to go into shock and they're not going to eat. So, and on top of that, you need to feed them crickets or insects. You have to figure in the wild, these things are not going to be finding pinkies and meats to eat as babies. They're going to be eating insects. And this is to get them the proper gut biome going so they can have a good gut biome established for when they become adults. And, you know, you need to make sure that you give them the proper diet in the beginning. And after a couple months or whatever, you're welcome to start, you know, cycling in ground turkey and whatever. And I give hard-boiled eggs and stuff like that. But you don't want to force meats onto your animals, especially the hatchlings. And then make sure that they have a really good basking area if you're going to start having meats, because they will definitely need to bask a ton in order to get rid of those. So let's start talking about your cage setup. So I'm just going to read through this stuff, hopefully, and not bore you guys with a bunch of commentary, but I want to make sure that everybody has a good amount of information, because it helps out if you guys call me and you have educated questions. If you're asking me questions that are in the care sheet, I just get frustrated, and I'm going to still help you out, but it's I don't want to say demoralizing, but it's discouraging. So I put a lot of work into these care sheets. I just want you guys to read them. So here we go. Cage setup. It is important to understand that a captive born and bred CBB monitor spends the entire development stages of its life in an egg, in a controlled environment. Eggs incubate at a high humidity and at about 86 degrees for 180 to 210 days. When they eventually hatch from the egg, it is extremely important to be able to recreate this condition, at least in some fashion, in their new home to avoid sending the monitor into shock and to minimize acclimation time. The two largest mistakes I see people make is putting their new hatchling in an enclosure that is either way too big or way too small, and not using a 24-hour ceramic heat source. To maintain an ambient temperature that is close to the temperature that they incubate at, you will need to have a heat source running constantly with a separate non-heat emitting light source. Light sources should be on a timer set to 14-hour daylight cycles with a 10-hour night cycle. Ceramic heat sources should be kept away from water sources and should stay on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is where people run into issues. If you are using a 150-watt ceramic bulb in a small 20 to 40-gallon aquarium, you will not be able to maintain a basking area of 120 to 140 degrees without detrimentally affecting the ambient temperature. If the enclosure is too large, it may be difficult to build trust with your new animal without continuously putting it on the defensive. I recommend using an enclosure that is 4 foot long by 2 feet by 2 feet, as this will make it easier to dial in the ambient without having the heat source so close to the water that it gets too hot. A general rule of thumb here is if your water tub is getting above 80 degrees on the cold side, then you need to make some adjustments. Using a large stone under your heat source will decrease ambient temps and help maintain a hot spot. Do not use floor tiles, as they simply cannot hold enough heat energy efficiently. On the UV side, I always recommend using incandescent UVB tropical light sources. You do not want to use a flood lamp or anything that produces extra heat, as they will be basking under the ceramic bulbs and absorbing UVB while swimming most of the day. You should shoot for a linear temperature range of 75 to 80 degrees on the cold side, which will include the water dish and UVB source, a center section with an ambient of 85 to 87 degrees, and a hot side with a ceramic bulb and stone spot temperature of 120 to 140 degrees at the stone's surface. It is not important to create an excess of humidity for your water monitor, as they spend most of their time in the water, and the hot basking temps make this nearly impossible anyways. A simple spray down once a day is fine. Make sure your enclosure is located off the floor and has an access to the front of the enclosure, as you do not want to be reaching in for a baby from above, and you do not want your cat trying to attack the little guy all day. When it comes to cage height, water monitors are not huge climbers, but if they have the space to climb, as hatchlings, they will do it. Top tip: if you can put your water tub up off the floor, it will free up more usable space for your monitor and allow you to drain it from underneath. This is obviously a tip for a larger enclosure when you guys get there. As far as the height of your cage, you're going to want to get something at least belly button high. I mean, I'm 6'2", 215, so like I've noticed that the monitors that do the best as far as socializing, I guess you could call it, are in the higher enclosures. So usually I cycle the animals that aren't taking as well. I move those guys up even higher. And then they kind of start to see you as a piece of, I want to say as a piece of furniture or a tool that they can use to get down, rather than someone who's coming up to the enclosure that serves no purpose whatsoever aside from scaring the crap out of them every day when you come in to do water changes. So you want to change the way that you are perceived in the eye of the animal. You have to understand you are fighting against thousands of years of evolution here to create these animals into tame animals in captivity. These are natural born predators. They do not eat, vegetables. They eat meats. So they are natural born predators. It's very dissimilar from an iguana or something else that can survive on meats and stuff. Let's talk about their diet. These little guys are carnivores through and through, so make sure not to offer a tegu or iguana diet, like we just said. When it comes to hatchlings, they are excited by movement, and this will help to reinforce their natural hunting and feeding instincts. What this means for you is crickets, crickets, crickets. There's a reason why I wrote that 3 times, so I sink it in there. What I do is I order crickets online in bulk and set up a cricket tub. Feel free to check out the how-to video on our YouTube channel. I keep crickets in the enclosure 24/7 and then supplement other foods a few days a week. Create a feeding zone, like a dish, that stays in the enclosure and doesn't move, and don't move it, so the little ones can get used to checking that area for food. I'll often offer hard-boiled eggs, pinkies, super worms, and ground turkey. Top tip: roll the turkey into a ball so you can tell if they have been eating it or not. Makes it a lot easier to tell if your lizards have been eating it or not. If you throw like just a handful of turkey in there on a dish, if they start taking chunks out of it or whatever, especially if you have just one animal, like when I send you a hatchling or whatever, you don't really know if they've messed with it at all or anything, because a lot of times when they first get there, they're real shy and they don't really want to, interact and eat in front of you. So roll it into a ball and then put it in there, and then you can tell if they've messed with it or not. That's the best thing you can do. If you're gut loading your crickets, then you do not need to dust the other foods with vitamins. Once you have your dinosaur eating other foods like pinkies from tweezers or out of your hand, you're welcome to stop feeding crickets as to not miss an opportunity to interact while feeding. So crickets serve a really good purpose of making sure the animal knows that it's being well fed and it feels safe in the enclosure. And then once you can get them eating out of your hand or eating off tweezers, and you know that you'll be able to recreate that condition on a regular basis, then you can feel free to get rid of the crickets. As soon as you get rid of the crickets, you're basically creating an environment where you can continue to interact with that animal every time you feed it now, and you don't have to worry about, oh, well, it didn't want to interact with me today. Am I doing something wrong? Chances are you're not doing anything wrong. It's just ate a ton of crickets. So it got tired of waiting for you and just ate a ton of crickets. It's not really hungry. So if you want to remove the crickets from the diet, once you get an established hatchling and you move them on to meats, then by all means continue to do that and continue to work with your animal. Generally, I would like to see these little guys keep a high insect diet for at least the first 3 months after you get them. If you're going to dust your hatchlings food, please only use Exoterra brand reptile multivitamins, and make sure to check the expiration dates on the bottles. I've tried other brands in the past and have noticed it having adverse effects on appetite as well as having it show up on x-rays sitting in the stomach of animals long after it was given. Frequency of feeding depends on a few factors, including activity level and development. Keeping crickets available throughout the day and supplementing with other foods a few days a week will keep your monitor healthy and happy. If your animal is active, it is nearly impossible to overfeed a healthy growing hatchling with a diverse diet. So you're going to want to just keep a ton of crickets in there at all times. Make sure that you can kind of supplement throughout the week. Don't leave food in there overnight because it'll spoil and it just makes the entire enclosure smell horrendous. So if you're going to say you want to feed a hard-boiled egg, hard-boil that egg the night before. Maybe keep it in the fridge. Take it out, put it in the microwave for 10 seconds because the very center, the yolk, will get super hot. A yolk is very dense and absorbs a ton of microwave energy. And crush it in your hand and make sure it's not, scalding friggin' hot. And put it in a bowl and put it in the cage. Then when you get home from work, take it out. Okay, don't leave it in there. Take it out because they're not going to mess with it anymore and it's been in there all day. But I usually do that. If you're going to feed other foods, you want to give them an ample amount of time to kind of get used to having the food in there and then taking it away. You don't want to leave it in there for forever. Ground turkey is the same way, especially when you feed all this stuff, keep it away from your heat source. It will smell horrendous and you'll come home from work and it'll smell like somebody perished in your home. So especially ground turkey gets disgusting. So put it off like by the water side or by the cold side so it doesn't turn into crap. Substrate. Do not use coconut products or any wood that is aromatic such as pine chips in a monitor enclosure. I get this issue all the time. I have people hit me up who have animals with respiratory infections and I ask them what substrate they're using. Chances are they are people who have ball pythons and python breeding projects, and they put pine chips in their enclosures, which is horrible for water monitors. Also, the coconut fibers. Coconut, when it gets dried out, the micron count of the fibers is very small and it gets stuck in the respiratory systems of the monitor lizards. Monitor lizards do not have a sinus. They have no way of creating kind of a mucous membrane that catches all the stuff like we do, where we get boogers. They don't get boogers. They get their lungs completely full of crap and they suffocate. And it happens over a long period of time that you probably won't notice. So do not use coconut products. Coconut specifically is meant to be soaked all the time. I mean, that's the whole advantage to using coconut is it's a neutral medium and it doesn't really break down in moisture, so you can keep it really wet. You cannot keep a water monitor's enclosure soaked with coconut bedding, especially with heat as high as you have to keep it. It's not possible. So don't use it. There's no advantage to using any of that crap anyway, aside from the fact that you probably had some. Same thing with the floor tiles. You had some sitting in a shed somewhere, so you decided to use it. Don't do that. If you're spending that kind of money on a water monitor or whatever, buy the proper stuff, take care of them the right way. We specifically use forest floor pure cypress mulch. That's all I use for the hatchling enclosures. So coconut media is meant as a substrate for animals with extremely high humidity where the substrate is constantly wet, like we were just talking about. This is because the dust from this media is extremely harmful and sometimes fatal, especially in the case of a small hatchling. Small hatchlings have very small nasal passages, and it all gets sucked up in there. You figure if you have a bunch of dust that gets kicked up from a digging hatchling or a hatchling rummaging around, you now have them stuck in a box of death with zero air movement, and it's hot. So it is a recipe for disaster. Don't use it. Water monitors do not have a sinus, so what they breathe in has the potential to make it straight into the lungs. Coconut fiber dust is extremely abrasive and small and has been known to cause lung development issues and ultimately respiratory infections and suffocation. With the high basking temps of this species, it is important to keep all the substrates soaked, which leaves the animals basically in a confined space filled with hazardous debris. So you're not going to be able to keep it soaked. The same goes for aromatic woods like pine chips. When it becomes wet in a confined space, the aroma of the substrate can become toxic and cause respiratory issues. With that said, I highly recommend ZooMed Forest Floor Cypress Mulch. I've tried many substrates over the last 13 years of breeding these guys. We're up to like 14 or whatever now. And this is by far the easiest to work with, especially for a hatchling. When it comes to adult monitors, you may want to incorporate bioactive soils, etc. But for a hatchling that is probably being kept in your room or a common area in your home, cypress mulch is by far the cleanest and least smelly solution. If you are set if you are set on using topsoils in your enclosure, make sure to use only natural organic topsoils or garden soils or fill dirt, and you may want to create a digging area to keep the dirt out of the water. Anything in the cage will end up in the water. That's just the way it is. If your hatchling is all settled in and you have no issues with temperature or defensiveness in the cage, then feel free to increase the depth of the substrate and allow them to dig. If you have the opposite condition, especially when you first receive your new dinosaur, do not make the substrate too deep. Simply put enough in to cover the floor of the enclosure. You can always add more later. Um, do not use bark from Home Depot. There's a reason why these ornamental barks at Home Depot say that they are good for 12 months or color changes for 12 months. It's because they're full of dyes and preservatives. Natural wood does not all look the exact same color in every single bag. It's because they dye it all brown, or they dye it all gray, or they dye it all a natural color. That is all chemicals. Do not use that in your lizard's enclosure. Same thing with peat or peat moss. Peat is made to be mixed with soils, and it's supposed to bring the acidity level down. So you don't want to use stuff like that. All this stuff will end up in the lizard's water source and eventually into the animal. So especially if you have a hatchling that's running around eating crickets off the floor, it's gonna end up eating the substrate. So do not put stuff in there that can screw it up. The cypress mulch, I've had animals eat cypress mulch. It just compresses down and they'll digest it out. They don't actually digest it, but they process it out. So I can't recommend any of the stuff that I don't use. I specifically use ZooMed Forest Floor because it's easy, it's attainable. If Petco carries it, Petco carries everything I have. It's either Petco or Home Depot, and usually there's one around. And if your Petco doesn't have it, you can order from any Petco and have it delivered to that specific Petco. So you can just go pick it up at your Petco, and it doesn't cost you anything to do that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about water types. The rule of thumb here is to always have a large enough water source that is not getting too hot by the end of the day and is at least as long as your monitor. You don't need to go crazy here. These are not crocodiles. A Tupperware that is about 3 to 4 inches deep is fine. You'll need to change water likely every day. A top tip here is to feed your monitor early in the day so it can go poop, then change the water later in the day. Water monitors are notorious for pooping in clean water, and this may save you a trip. Using simple tap water is never proven to be harmful to monitors, as chlorine is not a stable water additive. Chlorine can be neutralized by using UV sources in enclosures and will be neutralized as soon as the monitor starts swimming in the water, which inevitably oxygenates it. If you're not comfortable with tap water, then by all means use a purer source like RO water, which is reverse osmosis water, or distilled, but be aware that these filtering methods often remove valuable elements. So we always have people ask about using tap water. And to be honest, I mean, tap water is way more heavily regulated than bottled water. Tap water is regulated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, because it goes out to people's homes. Bottled water is not. It's an FDA regulation. So they have a bunch of blanket regulations that literally cover water, vitamin water, Gatorade, pretty much any types of fluids that go into a bottle. So as far as chlorination goes, chlorine is good for water. It sanitizes it, and it's not a stable additive. So by the time you fill up the water dish in your lizard's enclosure, and just the oxygenation of you filling up that water dish with a hose and the UV beating on it from the UV source that's above it in the cage, that chlorine becomes neutralized very, very quickly. And it's a non-issue. Chlorine literally breaks down very, very easily in tap water. So if you're worried about the chlorine content in the water, it's a non-issue. The only thing is with the other types of water, like RO water and distilled water, you're losing a lot of the good beneficial factors in water, which are the different elements and stuff like that that are in them. As far as hides go, it is important to keep in mind that these can always be added later. You don't need to go out of your way to make your enclosure look like the set from Jurassic Park. I know you want to, because I want to all the time, but I have to stop myself and think what's best for the lizards. So you can always add that stuff later. Once you've developed trust with your animal, you get them eating and everything, by all means, go full-blown Jurassic Park. I don't care. But for now, stick to the basics. Get your little guy settled in, give him the respect he deserves, get the guy settled, and make sure you're set up for success. I know a lot of us want to build an awesome, realistic enclosure for our little ones to come home to, but this can be detrimental to building trust. This is not always the case, but it is an issue of risk versus reward. Allow your animal to get to know you as much as they can, because a scared animal will always choose hiding over interaction. That's just pure evolution. You do not want to create a condition where you're having to catch or find your monitor before every interaction. This will set you up for failure. If you're always having to chase your lizard around the cage with your hand and grab it, that means that your animal's going to have anxiety, because it's going to get chased around the cage every time that you come over to the cage, and it's going to turn into a lizard that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth every time you walk by. So you want to have a positive interaction. You're going to have to figure out how to do that. There's lots of different ways you can do it. Every lizard is different. There's no fail-proof way for these guys. They have personalities. They're very smart. They're all different. So just from the time that they hatch out of the eggs, there is a noticeable difference in character between a lot of the animals. So you have to figure out what works for your animal. I can give you suggestions, and if you're honest with me about what you've tried and the kind of work you've put in, I can help you out. But ultimately, it comes down to consistency. So the next area is interactions, and this is a very, very, very important section of our care sheet. There is no hard rule for interacting with your new pet, and there is absolutely no one technique that works on all animals. With that said, your enclosure setup and patience will only make things easier. It is not fair to yourself or your new pet to not give them or yourself the chance to gain trust in one another. It is important to realize that your animal was just taken from its home, from its brothers and sisters, thrown in a box and sent across the country to a stranger's house with an entirely new environment. The moment that you get your animal is the most stressed it has ever been, and if you keep your animal for its lifetime, the most stressed it will ever be. It is going to take consistency and diligence to break its natural inclination to be defensive. That's why it's called trust building and not trust having. I recommend interacting with your new monitor once a day during water changes by simply moving it out of the water if it is swimming when it's time to change it. This technique is simply used for you to be able to get to know your animal. If it is constantly trying to climb out of the enclosure into your arm, or is super curious and chill right out of the box, then feel free to advance out of this phase at your own pace. This is simply a basic starting point to gauge the personality of your particular animal. Every animal is different, and every situation is different. Setting up your enclosure like I do and following the above recommendations will simply make the animal less stressed upon arrival and will ultimately make for a better pet down the road. After your animal is settled in and trust has been established, you are more than welcome to make changes as you see fit. And the trick here is to be patient. Be patient, be patient, be patient. I can't tell you how many times I send animals out and people are already blowing me up, asking me very basic questions the first day that they get them, the second day that they get them, the third day that they get them, with worried questions, and you are literally just stressing out your lizard. You are taking the stress and stressing out your lizard. You have people who are already trying to make cage changes because they think something won't work. This is a long-term investment, and the work that you put in is an investment. So you have to do it over time. You don't save up money in a day, so you have to put in that work. Think of it as putting deposits in a bank account. You put a little deposit here, a little deposit there, a little deposit there. Soon enough, you have a balance that you feel good about, and you can work off that balance from now on. So you need to put the work in. You have to put the work in. You have to make the deposits. Um, a few days is not enough time to gauge anything, anything. Aside from your animal being healthy when it shows up, you shouldn't have any health issues. It may not be eating at this point, but if you're keeping crickets in the enclosure like you're supposed to, like our care sheet says, chances are it is eating. You're just not seeing it. And if you're standing in front of the cage watching it all day to see if it eats and it isn't, it's probably the confirmation bias where you're standing in front of it, so it's not going to eat. So you have to get away from it, let it settle in, be patient. I know it's odd, or it's a little uncomfortable for people to do that, but I always answer my phone. If anything happens, I always take care of everybody. It's not a big deal. So as long as you are following directions, we don't have any issues. It's when people deviate and start messing with stuff that you run into problems. And then on top of that, when people start messing with stuff, they tend to become a little defensive and they get a little dishonest. Just tell me up front if you've made changes. That's why I always require people to send me photos of their enclosures and to check temps and everything, so I know that you are all set up and good to go for your new hatchling to come in, and everything is good to go. Because I want you to already be set up for success by the time that animal gets there. As soon as that animal gets there, you are set up to where you put the animal in the box, do water changes, and add crickets. That's it. That's all you should be doing. And then you will be able to figure out what that animal's personality is over the next week or 2 weeks or month or whatever it takes. And then you'll have a lot more information to work off of to figure out what works for your animal. If you're not patient, you will not get to know your animal, and you will not break ground and be able to bond with it. You have to get to know your animal. So you want to make sure that you do all that. Stress. This is a huge part of the care sheet, and I especially added this section because it is a huge misconception in the industry. And the word stress gets thrown around very casually, and I don't think it should be. And it's thrown around so much that it's lost a lot of its meaning. So I wanted to go over everything as far as stress. So, stress. The word stress has lost its meaning in the reptile trade over the years because it has been used as an excuse for bad husbandry. Stress is a normal part of keeping any animal in captivity, but it does not need to be detrimental to your animal's health. As a general rule of thumb, if your animal is eating, then it is not stressed. Quotes. Out enough to take serious note, assuming its environmental needs are being met. Many things can cause an animal to stop eating, and more than likely it is enclosure setup or location. Putting the enclosure on the floor where it is constantly at the level of foot traffic and house pets will force your animal into a fight or flight reaction, which will shut down its digestive system. On the flip side, if your enclosure is not set up similar to the way it was housed successfully before, then you will have an animal that is going through an acclimation period, which is also a form of shock. This is not at all unnatural, but it can be avoided. The biggest issues I see often are pet owners trying to do way too much to alleviate stress. More often than not, the keeper is the one perceiving stress, when in reality, they are simply going through a natural transition. This turns south when you begin to make changes multiple times a month, which actually ends up causing measurable stress and damage to the animal's health. You do not want to be the one to stress out your new pet. I promise you they will be under a certain amount of discomfort when they arrive, as is expected. This is why it is absolutely crucial that you get your cage and temps dialed in long before your animal gets there. As always, I am constantly making myself available for questions before making changes to your animal's enclosure. So long as you have followed the guidelines above, all reptile breeders should stand behind their animals and freely give their knowledge to keep and care for them. So there's a few things here. the stress of an animal, if your animal really is stressed out, it won't eat. You're going to notice health effects. Um, your animal is going to be stressed out in some degree when it arrives to your home. I mean, you have to be, I don't know, I guess you need to be aware and realistic that your animal is going to be stressed out. It's it's a wild animal. It just went through this whole ordeal and you're putting it in a box. So it's going to be stressed out. Now, as far as stress, meaning it's going to die, no, it should never be stressed out so much that it's not eating, um, at least for a long period of time. There is going to be an acclimation period, and it might be up to a couple weeks where your animal, maybe, it's a little off or whatever, but this should not be a sign of long-term stress. If you're following all of the guidelines that we have here, you are literally taking the animal, we're putting it in a box, sending it to you, and it is going back into a similar environment. That's the whole idea behind this care sheet. So just the fact that it has lived for months at my house in this same environment and has thrived and is obviously still alive, it has been eating in that similar environment at my house. So when we go to your house and we drop the monitor off or ship it or whatever, it is going back into an environment that it already knows, it's already comfortable in, it's already biologically sound inside that environment. So it can start eating and thriving again. And now the only stress that it should be under is getting to know you as its new owner. So we should be able to cut out all the variables as far as husbandry and environmental changes and let it just focus on you. Now, if we send that animal to you and it's in a totally different environment, you're doing nighttime cool downs, your cage is on the floor, it's in an aquarium, you're reaching for it from above, and it's trying to get along with you, you're going to stress it the hell out. And it's not going to do well. It just won't. And a lot of times they won't come back around. These animals are very fragile as hatchlings. They are. So you have to keep all that stuff in mind when you're setting up these enclosures, and you need to be open to constructive criticism. I always make myself available, especially on cell phone calls. If you send me a text message or an email that's ridiculously long, I will reply back with my phone number because I want you to call me. And it's not me being an asshole wanting you to just blow you off. It's because I want you to call me so I can go over everything, because I don't want to miss something because I'm in a hurry trying to type it out. So I always want to help you guys out, get all this stuff set up. And I've had to help other people's animals where they bought a hatchling for somebody else that wasn't eating, and we changed the caging environment to what I use here, and it worked. And it makes perfect sense that you would obviously want a caging environment that is similar to incubation, to aid in continuing development. At least once those animals come out of the egg, you can continue that development up for at least a month or so, and let them settle in and get settled in and start eating and everything. So it makes perfect sense if you think about it. As far as, nighttime cool downs and stuff, you can do a lot more of that stuff when you have a larger animal. They're a lot more robust. But for now, with the hatchlings, you really need to take particular care in the way you're taking care of them. Keep food available with them all the time. Get the proper caging. These animals aren't cheap, so get the proper caging, get the proper stuff. These domes, 150-watt ceramic, and an incandescent UV source. Get a stone for the heat spot, and just get one of those half moon hides that you get at any pet store, the little wooden half moon hides. It's like a piece of bark that's open on the back and on the front. Don't use anything plastic under your heat source, because it will get hot and it will release. I think it releases chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs. So I would be careful with that. Similar to if you have a heat source under your water dish, you're releasing contaminants out of the plastic into the water as well, which is why people say don't leave water bottles in your hot car during a hot day, because there's actually a seepage of chemicals from the actual plastic that gets into the water, and it can cause issues over time, I guess. But that's beside the point. So just little things like that. Keep in mind. Set everything up. It's real basic. You can get everything everywhere. You can order all this stuff on Amazon. You can get it at your Home Depot. Get it at your Petco. Make a couple trips. You know, it's not a huge deal. If you're trying to keep this animal for 20 years, you need to make the investment now and get all this stuff off to the right start. It makes no sense to not set yourself up for success and then think that you're going to be able to take this animal down to the extent of its lifespan, down to 20 years. You need to start it off well. If you don't start off well, you're going to end up with an animal that has developmental issues and it's going to die before it hits 5 years old. I mean, it's just the way it is. I've seen it happen on numerous occasions. So you have to put in the work now. Plus, nobody wants a 6-foot lizard that wants to kill them. Everybody wants a 6-foot friggin' urban dino that, you know, that's like a dog. So you need to put in the work. You have to put in the work. So hopefully you guys got something out of this care sheet. I rambled on for almost an hour, which is a lot. American Idol's on. I gotta go. So hopefully you guys got something out of that. And listen to this damn thing. And if you need to, listen to it again. And make sure to call me if you have any questions. 619-549-1508. That is my cell phone number. If I do not answer, leave a message. I will call you back, usually in the same day. So do not hesitate to call. I like talking to you guys. Please call. It's not an issue. Anybody, ask anyone. Nobody's ever called me and I turned down talking to them. It's literally never happened. So I will always make time to talk to people about the animals because it means a lot to me. And I do this stuff for fun. This is not what I do for a living. So with that said, keep feeding.